Hi, welcome to the Abort Ignorance Montana Podcast. My name's Tanea, your host. I'm excited that you're with us today. Today we're going to be diving into the state of affairs of abortion in Montana. So we're going to be going over what is abortion, is it legal here, if it's legal, what procedures are offered, how many abortions happen, just some facts that you can use to make your decision about if you think abortion is good for our state or not. So without further ado, we're going to dive right in. As we go through this information, if you end up with a question or a comment, please send that to us. We want to hear it. You can email it to abortignorancemt@gmail.com. You can comment on our YouTube, Facebook, Instagram post, send us a private message, and then make sure to subscribe to this channel so that you get notifications of future podcasts. And don't forget to download the episodes. You can listen to it wherever you are at any time. All right. So as we dive into the state of affairs of abortion in Montana, we are going to start off with the question of, is it legal here? So if you listen to our previous episode, you heard my story of not understanding abortion or not having any idea of what the laws were or what was offered or not offered in our state. And by diving into that information, I quickly realized what abortion was, and that really impacted me. And realizing that we do have abortion in our state made me want to start this organization and this podcast and just kind of open the conversation of, is any of this good for us or not? So so I'm just going to share some of that information that I found when I was on that journey. So abortion is legal in Montana. Again, I wasn't aware of that a few years ago, so it's okay if you didn't know that or weren't sure, but it is legal, and it started in 1999 is when it first became under our Constitution. So there was a court case called State versus Armstrong, and basically what happened at that time in 1999 was the courts decided that the interpretation of our right to privacy in our state constitution includes the right to an abortion. So that gave us a right to an abortion in Montana under the claim of it's your private information, it's your private right, you get to decide if you want to have that or not. So that made it legal in our state. And then from there, we've had quite a few laws come forth to just regulate abortion. So just some common sense laws around things like parental consent and regulating like reporting of abortions, or saying, how far along in a pregnancy can you have an abortion? Those types of things. So just some common sense laws that have happened over the years that have come forth to just put some parameters around abortion. And so we said, okay, it's legal. And now we said, okay, so how, when, and where can abortions happen? And should we be reporting on, if there's any adverse effects that happen? And so that's what all of that was about. And that's been happening since 1999. And there was one law in particular that I want to focus on called the Parental Consent Act. And it happened in 2013. And that was basically just saying if a minor child goes in seeking an abortion, that their parent has to be notified that they have sought that, and they have to consent to that abortion. And so the notification versus consent was debated quite a bit. And that actually went through our legislature in 2013 and said, okay, we do have parental consent, and it passed. It went into law. The governor signed it. And then, so it should have went into place and said, okay, yes, a parent has to sign off on a kid going to a field trip. They have to be notified of that. And we think that that should also happen for something like abortion, which is a big deal for a minor child to decide on their own if they should have that or not. And so that's all that was saying. And again, a very common sense law. As a parent, you would likely want to know that was going on with your child. I'm a parent. I would want to know lots of things going on in my child's life. I'd want to be able to have a say and an influence in those, whether that's about abortion or their education or what they eat each day, anything. Like, that's our job as parents, right? We get to help, or we get to exclusively raise our kids and give them the guidance that they need and the care and the protection. And we want to know what's going on in their lives. We want to know what makes them happy, what makes them sad. We want to know what hobbies they like, what hardships are they going through. We want to know if they're being bullied at school. We want to know if they, got picked for the varsity sports teams. Like, we want to know things about their lives because they're our kids and we love them. And so all that this law was saying was, okay, we have abortion in our state, but as parents, we want to know if our child is going to seek that out. We want to be notified and be able to have a say in that decision with our kid. So it was about parental rights. And I would say any parent would likely, I would think, want to know about that. And whether you are pro-abortion or not pro-abortion, I imagine you'd still want to know, just as a parent, that they're going to go through that so that you can help them through it and help them make that decision. And so that's what was happening in 2013. We had elected state officials that went to our legislature and made laws for us, and we felt that those people would represent us well. That's why we elected them. And they passed a law that said, okay, we want parental consent in our state. And again, that went to the governor's desk, was totally in place. But then a minority group in Montana decided to sue that law and say, okay, the majority of people, you elected these officials that represent you and made this into law. So we're saying, yes, in Montana, we want parental consent for abortions for a minor child. And a minor group of people said, we don't think that's constitutional. And that's their right. They can do that. And they sued the law. And so what happens when someone brings a court case against a law that's already enacted, it does something called enjoins. So it enjoins that law, which just means they can't enforce it until the courts hear the case and they hear both sides of, is this constitutional or not? And so this parental consent law went into effect in 2013 and then was immediately enjoined. So it couldn't actually, it wasn't actually useful to anyone, and it had to wait to be heard in the courts. And so that sat there for over a decade, and that law was not brought to the Supreme Court to be heard until 2025, just last summer. And so it took over a decade for them to even hear that. So the entire time, 12 years, parents were not being notified when their kid was seeking an abortion. It wasn't happening. And even though everyone in Montana at that time voted and said, we want these, they voted for their legislators. We want these people to make these types of laws for us. The majority of people in Montana were in favor of these types of laws. And they didn't get to have it enforced, even though they passed it. And so that's what enjoined does. And so that sat there until 2025. The courts ruled on that, like I said, last summer, and they shot it down. They said this is not constitutional. There's a right to privacy, and the right to privacy extends to minors exclusive from their parents. So parents, you don't have a right to know what's going on in your child's life, is what the court said. And that has happened to a lot of laws around abortion in Montana. And so I'm sharing that just to give you a picture of kind of what goes on behind the scenes with abortion in Montana and the laws and regulating it. I just think it paints a good picture of, we have, laws that are coming through that are representing the majority of people here that say, okay, we think there should be some parameters around abortion. Not saying it should be illegal, but there should be some parameters, like notifying parents if their child goes in to seek an abortion. And then we have a minority group in Montana that's saying, well, we don't like it, and so we're going to sue it and tie it up in the courts. And then we have this court system that takes over a decade to even hear the case on this enjoinment. And I have heard from people that are pro-abortion, and this situation that keeps happening in our state of laws passing, getting enjoined, sitting in courts for a decade until they're actually heard. Even pro-abortion folks have said, okay, this is this is ridiculous. This is not how the system is meant to work, and we need to fix it. And so that just, again, paints a picture, gives you some information of what's been going on. So it's been difficult to regulate abortion because of minority groups in our state, even just common sense regulations to make it safe for people and to report on it, to give us statistics to say, okay, are there adverse effects? Are women being harmed by this? Or is it totally safe? So we don't even have the information we need in our state to make an informed decision about abortion, because laws keep getting enjoined. And so that's just, again, paints you a picture of kind of what's been going on. As I said, there's been lots of laws that have been passed to help put some parameters around it. They're getting enjoined. And so from there, in 2024, there was something that came forth that expanded abortion access in our state. So it was called CI 128. That stands for Constitutional Initiative 128. And essentially what that did, that passed, and what that did was that changed our state constitution to, instead of just having an interpretation of abortion under a right to privacy, we now have actual abortion language in our constitution that states that abortion is legal, and it makes it broadly legal. And so it actually expands the access to abortion in our state, that we can now have abortions, up until, third trimester, and there's even less regulation on it. So some things like that is what CI 128 does, and it makes it really, really solid. And so now we aren't seeing a lot of laws coming forth right now to put some parameters around what abortion maybe should or shouldn't be in our state, because it's actually physically in our constitution. So that was a big deal. That was in 2024. That happened. And so when that parental consent law was finally heard in the court in 2025, 12 years after it was made into law and then enjoined, CI 128, the Constitution had already been changed to state that abortion is legal, and it included minor children. And so the law from 2013 was null and void. So when they ruled on it in 2025, they didn't have any other way to rule on it, because abortion was actually in our constitution at that point. So that's the state of affairs of the legality of abortion in our state. It is legal. It's in our constitution. One of only, I think it's 25. Yeah. So 25 states have abortion in their constitution. 17 of them have it in a similar fashion that we do. And so that's a lot of states. We're one of them where it's in our constitution. So with that, now I think we should dive into, okay, so then what actually is abortion, and where is it offered in our state? So if you were to access an abortion, where would you find that? So I just did a quick Google search when I was first learning about all of this to just figure out what is the definition, just the basic definition of abortion, not what do I think about it, what do you think about it, is it moral, is it ethical, nothing like that, just what's the Google definition of abortion. So I did that, and the definition is: abortion is a medical procedure used to terminate a pregnancy. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. But then I had to ask myself, that's also a lot of vague language. So what is the Google definition of pregnancy? And that is the period when a fertilized egg develops into a fetus inside the uterus. Okay, there's also a lot of sciencey terms in that. And so the key phrase in that is the fetus, which has been developed after fertilization. So a fetus, the definition, is an offspring of a human, and offspring just means a person's child or children. So all of that, as we, pick apart the vague language of what is an abortion, just so that we can understand it on a base level, that molds it down to: abortion is a medical procedure used to terminate a person's child. So Google definitions, again, not implying any personal thoughts into that, just it is used to terminate a person's child. Okay, so it's ending the life of a child is the definition of abortion. And so now let's say, do we offer that? Do we offer ending the life of a person's child in our state. And as we just went over, we have six clinics in our state. So Billings, Great Falls, Helena, Missoula, and Whitefish all have clinics that offer abortions. 2 of them are private clinics, 4 are Planned Parenthoods. So there's a chain of Planned Parenthoods in our state. And then there's different types of abortion. So there's 4 types of abortion. We're just going to go over the basics of those in this episode. So there's the chemical abortion, also known as the abortion pill, and that can be taken up to 11 weeks of pregnancy, and it can be mailed. So you don't have to go into a clinic to get an abortion pill. It could just be mailed out to you. And so that you don't get checked for things like ectopic pregnancy or, verifying that it is actually your pregnancy is at 11 weeks instead of further along or not as far as along. It's just an estimate from the person that says, okay, I'm less than 11 weeks, and you can take that abortion pill and you can have an abortion at home in our state. We also offer a suction abortion, or called an aspiration abortion, and that's up to 14 weeks of pregnancy. So that one is essentially the baby hasn't yet developed like a more solid structure to it. And so they can just use a suction tool and suction the baby out for that abortion. And then we offer dilation and evacuation in our state, and that's up to 24 weeks. And that is similar to the suction abortion, except for you actually have to go under anesthesia for that because the baby is so far along that it has to come out in parts. It can't just come out in a tube. And so we currently offer those types of abortions. Those are the 3: the abortion pill, a suction abortion, and dilation and evacuation, up to 24 weeks of pregnancy. And the last type of abortion is an induction abortion, and that is for late-term abortions. And essentially, you have to be induced into labor and deliver the baby. And the baby is first given an injection that causes it to die in the womb, and then you're induced and you deliver the baby. And it's called an induction abortion. And that one we don't currently offer in our state. But with our constitutional amendment, CI 128 that I mentioned, it would be legal to offer it in our state. We just currently don't have a clinic that does offer it. Okay, so that's just kind of the types of abortions we offer and where they're offered at. And so then how many abortions are happening in our state? That would be good to know, right? Maybe it's a lot, maybe it's not very many. And that would have an impact on our thought process of, okay, is abortion good for our state or not? So we have, let me preface this with, we actually don't have a lot of record of abortion numbers in our state because prior to 2023, there was never a law that we passed that stated that we have to report on abortions. And so clinics were not required to report on what they were offering and how many people were coming in for those abortions until 2023. So we don't actually have a lot of data to go off of. But the data that we do have, it says that we have had in 2023, just that year, there was 2,175 abortions that took place in our state. And that includes all the 3 types. So the pill, the suction abortion, and the dilation and evacuation. Most of the abortions that are happening in our state, like 82%, are happening through the abortion pill. And so those are women that aren't necessarily even having to go into a clinic. They're just having abortions at their home. And that's a really high amount. 82% of them are through the pill. And so anyways, that all boils down to about a little over 10 abortions per 1,000 women in our state are having that. So about 10% of women in our state are receiving abortions. And that might not sound like very much or very high. However, something to consider is, okay, how many abortions are happening? So how many times are we terminating the life of a child versus how many times is a child being born alive? Because that would matter for just our population growth, just from a simple economic standpoint. Is abortion affecting us in that area? Do we even have enough people being born in our state to replace the number of people we have dying in our state. And that's just the basic level of society. So if we're not growing as an economy, as a society, eventually you just die off. There isn't a society left. There's not, we don't have people that live in our state that exist here unless we have babies being born in a greater amount than we have of people dying. And so that's just simple, can we sustain this the way we're going? So again, 10% of women having abortions each year in our state may not sound like a lot, but we are in what is called a decrease of a natural decrease. So that's what I just explained. We're actually decreasing in population because of abortion in our state instead of increasing. And so that, does that matter? Is that a problem? And again, I would say that is some good food for thought of, can we even sustain this? And I would say no, because if we don't have enough people to replace those that are passing away in our state, we're not going to have a state. And so if you have questions on any of that, please send them in. I know it's kind of a unique perspective of, okay, this is purely economical. And I'm not saying that abortion simply boils down to an economic standpoint, but it is something to consider of, is this an indicator that abortion is doing more harm than good for our state? That's very possible. And it's possible that it's having a negative impact on our economy. Well, the data shows that it is having a negative impact on our economy. And so if you have, again, what are your thoughts on that? What are your questions? I want to hear from you guys. If you have questions on the types of abortions that are offered or the legality of it in our state, or again, what it means that we're having a decrease in population in our state because of abortion, please send me your questions, send me your thoughts, abortignorancemt@gmail.com. That is our brief state of affairs for abortion in Montana, where it's at, what it is, what's offered. So there you have it, folks. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Abort Ignorance Montana podcast.